Okay, I am unmuted. You are being very obedient and being muted. As it happened, lying on my desk is a Live Simply prayer card from CAFOD, so which is very ad rem because my title is Sufficiency, Living with Limitation. So, but I don't claim any credit for this card by this prayer by Linda Jones. Compassionate and loving God, you created the world for us all to share, a world of beauty and plenty. Create in us a desire to live simply so that our lives may reflect your generosity. Creator God, you gave us responsibility for the earth, a world of riches and delight. Create in us a desire to live sustainably so that those who follow after us may enjoy the fruits of your creation. God of peace and justice, you give us the capacity to change, bring about a world that mirrors your wisdom. Create in us a desire to act in solidarity so that the pillars of injustice crumble and those now crushed are set free. Amen. I'll try reading off the screen. I think that gives an easier keeping my eye on the camera. But if you prefer, if anyone's having difficulty, let me know in the chat box and I can move to reading from the text, okay? Okay, I'm not sure I have any very good answers to share, but the question I want you to take away from this evening is this. Can you have infinite growth in a finite world? You may think the answer obvious one way or the other. Perhaps you want to change the terms of the debate, pointing out that growth can be qualitative, about value added, as well as quantitative. The development of micro-technologies illustrates precisely how you can have more and use less at the same time. But nonetheless, let the question drill into your head and your heart, see whether it doesn't disturb you, make you pause and rethink your behaviors, and look again at the systems we accept as the natural order. I should perhaps say that I come with a bit of a health warning. I'm a one-man walking recession. I don't really buy stuff very much. I'm content with a simple diet, an aging car, and an older wardrobe, and I have no partner to chivvy me into freshening it. I also have a very low boredom threshold in shops. Retail is what could drive me to therapy. It's the problem, not the solution. You can either find that endearing, puzzling, or downright irritating. Typical otherworldly cleric, you might say, with no understanding of issues that real people face. It's also a very first world and privileged take on life. You have to be fairly far up the food chain before you can afford to opt out of it in any way. And it could be quite deluded too. I may kid myself that I'm living the ethical good life, but in fact my comfort rests on a whole infrastructure of which I'm only dimly aware. I may choose not to fly, but my soft fruit probably has plenty of air miles behind it, which, again, I'm unaware. I am far more entangled in our consumer economy and the ethical issues raised by that than I might imagine. I engage only with the tip of the iceberg of the issues and contradictions which run through our culture. Now, all of that is undeniably true, but is there perhaps still some merit in rejecting the gathering rush of the marketplace? Is there a sign value in the efforts of those who try to step away from consumerism and who try to march to the beat of a different drum? To put it another way, is it possible to critique our lifestyle other than by breaking with it? Given that the propaganda for consumption is so all-pervading, or should I say all-consuming? Do we need our John the Baptist crying in the wilderness, living off the wild locusts and honey, just to make us wake up to what's going on and what we're collectively doing to our world? There's no denying that consumerism has spurred technological innovation, but then again, so has war making. It's undoubtedly led to improvements in the comfort and ease of contemporary living in the developed world, even if the stuff we fill our lives with can become a curse. And to some extent, in the third world too, though the producing nations bear the burden of our exported carbon footprint, the often unregulated pollution attendant on manufacturing, the social dislocations caused by rapid industrialization and urbanization, the working conditions inflicted on those who serve us in the factories that supply us with our kit. Consumers want the latest and the best, or what the advertisers manage to persuade them is the latest and the best. The question is, at what cost? Economically, ecologically, psychologically. On March the 23rd, Boris Johnson explained to a meeting of the Conservative Backbench 1922 committee the reason why the development and distribution of vaccines against COVID-19 had gone so well. The reason we have the vaccine success is because of capitalism, because of greed, my friends. It's a very inadequate account of the response to COVID over the previous 12 months, which combined large-scale public funding of research, international scientific cooperation, a drugs company willing to work on a not-for-profit basis in the face of the pandemic, and delivery by our state-funded NHS. But do Johnson and his ilk still believe, like Gordon Gekko in Oliver Stone's Wall Street, that greed is good? It certainly can seem that way when you look at the likes of Jeff Bezos, Amazon's founder, whose personal fortune rose by $24 billion in the last year as a result of the pandemic. Meanwhile, the ONS statistics demonstrate how unequally the impact of COVID has fallen on the rich and the poor, with low-income households much more likely to be furloughed, but less likely to have been paid in full if unable to work, more likely to suffer a decrease in income overall, and of course, more likely to be unable to meet unexpected emergency expenditure. At the global level, to quote an international group of academics, lockdowns kill people through disruption of health services and deprivation of livelihoods. At the bottom of the global pile, recession is not just a matter of having less, it's a matter of life and death. Pope Francis has consistently spoken up on behalf of those left in destitution at the peripheries of society and against the prevailing economy of exclusion, nowhere more powerfully than in his 2013 encyclical Evangelii Gaudium, Joy of the Gospel. Human beings are themselves considered consumer goods, to be used and then discarded. We've created a throwaway culture. Those excluded are no longer society's underside or its fringes or its disenfranchised. They're no longer even a part of it. The excluded are not the exploited, but the outcast, the leftovers. To sustain a lifestyle which excludes others, or to sustain enthusiasm for that selfish ideal, a globalization of indifference is developed. Almost without being aware of it, we end up being incapable of feeling compassion. The culture of prosperity deadens us. We're thrilled if the market offers us something new to purchase. In the meantime, all those lives stunted for lack of opportunity seem a mere spectacle. They fail to move us. Ouch. History suggests that there will be a reckoning. Current inequalities and inequities are unlikely to last without being challenged, perhaps violently, in many parts of the world. We've already had one rude awakening in the form of the 2008 banking crisis. Who knows where the next threat to financial stability will come from? Maybe from events associated with global warming, fire and flood, hurricane and heat wave, or global pandemic for that matter. Maybe from cybercrime or cyber espionage, maybe, God forbid, from a nuclear exchange. But events will continue to threaten both the investor confidence, which is the basis for capitalism, and real people's lives on the ground. I'm not an economist, nor an expert in international relations. I'm not qualified to go further than raising these issues and leaving them for you to ponder in the light of Catholic social ethics. I just note as factors in our current global situation, the power of the super rich. Billionaires got 20% richer in 2020, according to Forbes. The growing inequalities across the world and the potential implications for the globalized economic system of this escalating divide, future health crises, further environmental degradation, a loss both of output and of markets for products, regional conflicts, forced migration. Now I want to explore the essential nature of consumerism and to suggest that it poses ethical dilemmas and spiritual threats every bit as great as the canker in the actual structures of the global economic system alluded to so far. Consider the slogan, new improved. It's an implicit admission by the manufacturer that what they used to sell us wasn't very good, or at least was old and unimproved. It's a triumph of the marketing department's sleight of hand that we rarely notice the implication. Those of us who are of a certain age might remember the first car we lusted after. Those past petrol-head love affairs now look boxy, dated, tinny, slightly weird. If, unlike myself, you're a fashionista, you could do a similar experiment with what was once à la mode. Frocks to die for back then easily become couture not to be seen dead in now. Here, ancient Greek can come to our help because the language has two words for new, neos and kainos. The first is the newness of novelty. It has a date stamp on it. The fashionable will one day inevitably become unfashionable. Kainos, on the other hand, has to do with the newness of quality, something of enduring value. The New Testament and the New Covenant, same thing in Greek, ekaine diatheke, have this second type of newness. Neos belongs in linear time, chronos in Greek, time which is relentless, cold, mechanical, absurd, meaningless. But again, biblical Greek offers us something better, kairos, the decisive time, the moment of discernment, judgment, and response. It's theological time, as expressed by Luigi Gioia. Kairos is the Lord himself who breaks into chronos and disrupts its blind monotony and its cyclical nature. As soon as the Lord enters history, he inaugurates a new beginning, a new creation, which rescues our lives from the cyclical nature of chronos by giving us a direction, a meaning, a purpose. It becomes the place where the kingdom of God breaks in and where we are granted a foretaste of the life to come. Consumerism has no concern for kairos, no capacity for provoking true transformation. Rather, it insulates us from the possibility of an inbreaking of the transcendent. In its novelty, it offers us nothing new, because at the heart of consumerism is dissatisfaction, a desire for that one more thing which will make my life somehow complete and assure me of my worth. But the quest cannot succeed, nor yield the satiety I crave. Marketing is quite willing to invoke altruism to sell its wares. My family deserves the best. Advertising is also willing to probe our insecurities and to offer us compensations for the struggles or the boredom of life, because you're worth it, naughty but nice. Or going back nearly 50 years, at its launch, the Access credit card, that's MasterCard to millennials, promised to take the waiting out of wanting. More recently, Donald Trump's niece wrote an excoriating account of her uncle, too much and never enough. When we look around at the debris left behind by our consumption, the literally unknown tons of plastic entering the oceans each year, the figures vary by more than 100% in the estimation of it. The 409 kilos of waste per person, quaintly quantified by the BBC website, for reasons best known to themselves, as the equivalent of 4 giant pandas each, which UK residents produce. Considering all that, Mary L. Trump's title might serve as a good summary of the dynamic at the heart of consumerism. Too much, never enough. The point is precisely not to fill the void in my being, but to stimulate my awareness of it so that I keep feeding the habit. At its most creative, advertising insinuates a desire which I did not even know that I had and turns it into a need. And it uses the whole arsenal of psychological insight into the workings of our brain, our pleasure centers, and reward centers, and the brain chemicals which are stimulated equally by real human interactions and by the click of a mouse to achieve the same. Consumption inherently carries the potential for alienation, being out of touch with our deepest God-given identity, which we overlay with the curated self-image that our shopping choices allow us to project. The logo and the brand weave a shorthand for tribal identity, inserting us in the anonymity of the crowd, while also being offered as a means of expressing our individuality, ironically. There's something a little comic about proclaiming our uniqueness through mass-produced products, isn't there? It's not needed. You're already unique. But you may never discover that if you content yourself with addiction to stuff, and to that little buzz which every acquisition promises, however fleetingly. There'll always be the need for the next hit. None of us can ever be satisfied by the things we buy because they do not reach the heart unless they really symbolize another's love. Christian faith insists we were not born to shop, but born to flourish, to create, to realize ourselves, and paradoxically, to achieve that by giving ourselves away, as Jesus himself challenged his first disciples. Anyone who wants to save his life will lose it. But anyone who loses his life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. What gain then is it for anyone to win the whole world and forfeit their life? We were born to discover that the way to satisfaction and contentment is not by power and control, but by knowing that we are loved. Loved, moreover, for who we are and not for what we have. Now, at this point, as you wanted to pause, I'm going to offer you a pause, and I'm going to just put in the sidebar, because I think the sidebar will oh dear, is that yeah, there are some questions if you want to unpack these things, or you might just want to talk about what I said. Have I posted that yet? What do I need to do to post it? I need to click at the end there. There we go. Can you have infinite growth in a finite world? What witness value is there in trying to live an alternative lifestyle? Do you recognize Pope Francis's portrait of a throwaway society and globalization of indifference? Does consumerism kill the poor and wound our own soul? Or anything else which you may want to say. So if you want to throw us into the outer darkness where there is grinding of teeth and breaking out, or you want to socially engineer us?
Okie dokie. A button should appear in front of you soon asking you to unmute yourself, so please do click that, and then the next one will invite you to join a breakout room. Nora, will we take 7 minutes or so?
You need to unmute, Nora.
Yes, I think 7 to 8 minutes, because the first group, people have to introduce themselves.
Okie dokie.
You'll recall us, won't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, he takes all control.
The power.
All right, join. All right.
Line 2.
Here we are then, back again.
Here we are.
We're back.
Oh,
Back in the room.
back.
Good evening, all.
Excellent. Now, rather than, are we all back or are we still waiting?
Yeah, I think this is everybody.
Great. Okay, so rather than doing any feedback now, can I suggest you mute again, and I'll go through second half of what I was going to say. Then you can decide whether you want to do another breakout room or to have a general chat. Whichever moderator can decide that for us. Okay, does that seem okay? Yeah. Excellent. I'm just going to hide my self view. It's one of the people were talking about Zoom. It's pluses and minuses before we really started. One of the psychological tricks is it puts you on edge if you are constantly watching yourself. So it is suggested it's better for your mental health to actually switch yourself off, which if you go to your 3 little dots, you can hide self-view. It's just one little pressure in terms of performing to ourselves. The other pressure that goes with Zoom apparently is because of the compression and because we're used to constantly micro-reading each other's facial expressions and And that's happening in the lower brain, in the animal brain, through millions of years of evolution. The animal brain is saying there's something wrong with that guy because his facial expression isn't doing what it's supposed to do. Whereas our higher brain is a more rational brain is saying there's nothing wrong. So you've actually got a dissonance happening in your head. So we are gently beating ourselves up when we use Zoom as well. So, so it is said. I'm just saying. Anyway, I shall stop whittering about that and start whittering about where I was before. I want to introduce one other element into my reflection concerning our consumption, and that predictably enough relates to our relationship to the natural world. What most people would agree is the crucial issue for the 21st century, and the reason that most of us are even thinking about consumption, sufficiency, and limitation in the first place. Since at least the Industrial Revolution, and arguably since the dawn of the biblical narrative, we've regarded ourselves as set over against creation. Although Genesis 2 has Adam and then Eve as his helpmate, set in the garden to cultivate and take care of it, in Genesis 1, the primordial couple are told, fill the earth and subdue it, be masters of the fish of the sea, the birds of heaven, and all the living creatures that move on earth, seemingly without limit. While God from the beginning sees that all of creation is good, fallen humanity has rarely managed an equal reverence. Even after the flood, Noah and his sons are mandated to be the terror and the dread of all the animals on land and all the birds of heaven, of everything that moves on land and all the fish of the sea. They are placed in your hands. I give you everything. Now that's a divine command we've truly taken to heart. And that despite the rainbow sign of the covenant that God then makes with every living creature. Humanity thus came to be seen as standing on and standing over against our common home, as owner rather than earthborn, colonizer rather than native. And in the 13,000 years since farming began, humanity has apparently cut down 3 trillion trees. It's perhaps inevitable that mining, which in some ways represents our most elemental struggle with the earth itself, as well as being the source of much of what we account as wealth, became emblematic of our violent conflictual relationship with our planet and its other life forms, a relationship which is the polar opposite of symbiosis and mutual aid. Mining inherently produces spoil. I've pointed out in other settings, spoil is soil with P in it. Slag, waste, pollution, deforestation. Industrial scale extractive industries brought about a deeper contamination of the human spirit as well. We forgot how to tread lightly on the earth, scarred its face, abandoned what we could not use as having no value, and failed to see the worth of what we had not yet destroyed. Perhaps you've seen the meme on social media, which identifies the problem at the heart of capitalism as this, that a forest has no value until it has been cut down. As Gerald Manley Hopkins put it in God's Grandeur, generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. Which said, we should remember that the poem ends not in despondency, but hope. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. Though the last lights off the black west went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs. Because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with our bright wings. It took the searing, blearing, smearing toil, the alienation of shod, unfeeling feet, the Rachel Carsons of this world, mourning the death of birdsong in a silent spring, the disproportionate emotional investment by some young radical idealists in the fight to save the whale, the mystic mindset of St. Francis and the providential election of his namesake, the unbending determination of a Swedish kid with Asperger's syndrome. It took all of this, poets and activists, alongside the disturbing discoveries of scientists, holes in the ozone layer, shrinking polar ice caps, an extinction rate running at 100 times the natural background level. All of this and more to waken us, perhaps in time, or maybe not, both to the disaster we're inflicting on our planet and to the fundamental need to change our worldview, literally our way of experiencing our common home, our relationship to the mother who sustains us all. But once we reject the alienation that experiences the earth as other, once we eschew the mining metaphor as the proper image to govern our relations with the ecosphere, once we embrace the fact that we are children of the earth, its tenants, not its masters, once we turn again and notice our mother's forgotten beauty, once we've got this far, the question comes back with renewed force. May we consume? Because consumption sounds like the mining metaphor returning in a more camouflaged, more digestible form. It helps to remember that we are dust, and unto dust we shall return. I don't mean by that we must acknowledge that we can't take it with us, that all we build and accumulate is inherently temporary, true though that be. I mean that all we are is borrowed from the soil, even though we are also bearers of the breath of God. Our humanity is of the humus. Our carbon structure is given to us on loan and will in turn be something, someone else. Nothing's wasted. One day I too shall be upcycled. There's a beautiful simplicity in that, a relationship that might reshape our way of interacting with the earth. We are but stewards in the garden, called to delight in its beauty in the brief minute of our passing through. Co-creators, called to augment its beauty, to do no harm, and more, to heal and not destroy. As Pope Benedict pointed out after the 2008 financial crisis, we're called to work in solidarity for intergenerational justice. In other words, we do not inherit the earth from our parents so much as borrow it from our children. And to intergenerational justice, we might add interspecies justice, fighting habitat depletion and the resultant loss of biodiversity. Which is all very well and good, but what has it got to do with the gospel, which I haven't yet quoted directly? Well, once. I suppose I'd point you to the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, the gentle, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, the pure in heart, the peacemakers. The Christian church has rarely known quite what to do with statements such as these. Perhaps they could be entrusted to a special group, enclosed nuns, mendicant friars, missionary priests, while the rest of us got on with the practical business of living, sticking to the 10 Commandments, or maybe not, and the logic of law as our guiding principle. Our culture certainly tends to view those qualities that Jesus highlights as blessed, at best as desirable but not necessary qualifications for membership of the human race. More frequently as unrealistic, airy-fairy, naive, impracticable. Climate change suggests the opposite, that these are profoundly practical, the only values which are adequate to the hour and which can steer us through the radical change required in our lifestyle, our relationships with each other, especially with our most vulnerable brothers and sisters, and our relationship with the planet. In his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si', Pope Francis invites us to a more mystical relationship with the planet, viewing it as the primordial revelation of God in the book of nature. Calls us to an integral ecology, linking concern for nature, justice for the poor, commitment to society, and interior peace. Commenting on St. Francis' way of regarding even the most insignificant of creatures by the name of brother or sister, the Pope writes this: if we approach nature and the environment without this openness to awe and wonder, if we no longer speak the language of fraternity and beauty in our relationship with the world, our attitude will be that of masters, consumers, ruthless exploiters, unable to set limits on their immediate needs. By contrast, if we feel intimately united with all that exists, then sobriety and care will well up spontaneously. The poverty and austerity of St. Francis were no mere veneer of asceticism, but something much more radical, a refusal to turn reality into an object simply to be used and controlled. Of course, Jesus got there first. That's why I'm telling you not to worry about your life and what you're to eat, nor about your body and clothing and what you are to wear. Surely life is more than food and the body more than clothing. Look at the birds in the sky. Think of the flowers growing in the fields. Set your hearts on his kingdom first and on God's saving justice, and all these other things will be given you as well. It isn't that the carpenter of Nazareth did not know the meaning of hard work. And yet in his work, he discovers the more than, specifically the more than food, clothing, consumption, the surplus of meaning contained in the little things of life, the divine incarnate in the mundane. Perhaps that's easier to achieve if you know you're going to be denied an old age, cut down at the age of 33. Perhaps it's easier for anyone living in a society with low life expectancy, where everyone knows that they are one crop failure from starvation, which is how so many people on our planet still live today. But as with the Beatitudes, as with St. Francis's mystical encounter with the natural world, we need to ask whether there isn't something we can learn from here, from Jesus's way of speaking here, in our post-industrial economy. Regardless of whether we manage to meet Paris climate goals, massive change is coming. There are no easy fixes. A recent article by 3 experts offers this worrying assessment of the mantra net zero by 2050, because it relies in large measure on technologies such as carbon capture, which don't exist yet in commercially viable form, on replacement of food crops by biofuel crops, with vast consequences both for agricultural production and biodiversity, non-dubious methodology in calculating the effect of the planting and burning of biomass, because it allows countries to defer change to some future, more economically and politically convenient date. This is their conclusion. Current net zero policies will not keep warming to within 1.5 degrees, because they were never intended to. They were and still are driven by a need to protect business as usual, not the climate. If we want to keep people safe, then large and sustained cuts to carbon emissions need to happen now. That is the very simple acid test that must be applied to all climate policies. The time for wishful thinking is over. My own hunch is that at its heart, consumerism, the mechanism of artificially generated desire, which seems to be the principal motor of contemporary economics, is incompatible with sustainable living. In any case, as you've heard, ecologists insist radical action must be undertaken right now to reduce our individual and collective carbon footprint. However, like an aircraft, contemporary global economic life must not be allowed to stall. So here's the bind we find ourselves in. Simply withdrawing from economic life, refusing to spend our money, those of us whose incomes have remained reliable through the pandemic may have benefited significantly by not having paid for travel to work, for holidays abroad, for meals out, for tickets to events. Our refusal to spend money will cause great suffering, especially for the most vulnerable in our communities. We seem to have reached a stage at which we are condemned to continued destructive patterns of behaviour, which we now see as unsustainable and which threaten social disorder and economic disaster, in order to sustain our way of life and to prevent social disorder and economic disaster. And that is both ironic and frightening. But perhaps we need to advocate revolution, social revolution, in order to avoid the threat of violence. Perhaps we need to put ourselves on a war footing, but a war footing against the spoliation of our planet in order to prevent war. I mean the revolution of a large-scale conversion of industry, not only to carbon-neutral forms of production, but to public projects which create a more sustainable future, especially for the poor and for the young. Sustainable transport schemes, retrofitting of insulation to homes, solar and wind farms, etc. After seeing the amounts that governments have been able to magic up in the last year to pay for furlough, primary health care and vaccination, no one can claim that large ticket initiatives aren't possible. To have any prospect of success, this would need to sit alongside a large-scale re-education of our citizens as to the consequences of their consumer choices, something which should be on the curriculum of every school, college and university. Many will say that hair shirt economics, the green austerity program, won't work because it won't carry the people with it. The green policies need to have a feel-good factor. But there's no feel-good factor in dealing with increasing numbers of extreme weather incidents, forest fires, droughts, or the disruption of the Gulf Stream. The honest truth is that we need to cut our standard of living, or rather our rate of consumption, in order to sustain our quality of life. Some will speak darkly of eco-fascism, taking control of our lives. What do we mean of our right to pollute, and of our being robbed of our freedoms by the nanny state? But the alternative is not no interference in a realm of blissful liberty. Consumers long ago lost control of their personal information to the social media companies which first farmed their data and then influenced their purchasing habits and even their worldview in ways they do not realize, by directing news feeds, advertising, and social messaging towards them on the basis of that data that they've just farmed. Just to reassure you, whatever my own puritanical tastes, the end of view is actually virtuous consumption, not no consumption. Homo faber, man and woman the maker, embracing our creativity in order to face our crisis and surmount it. But that's a spiritual goal. And without spiritual endeavor, it will be impossible. We have to begin by stepping back from defining ourselves by our possessions, our image, our consumption, in order to consume better, more sustainably, more gratefully too. Some years ago, Catholic took as a strapline Oscar Romero's words: aspire not to have more, but to be more. Yes, that. As life eventually teaches most of us, less is often more. We cannot force our brothers and sisters to embrace this restrained way of living, which is ascetical in the original and best meaning of the term, that it offers us a training for life lived well. However, we can show the viability and attraction that this path holds, despite or perhaps because of the self-limitation it requires. As Jesus himself said, enter by the narrow gate, since the road that leads to destruction is wide and spacious, many take it. It's a narrow gate and a hard road that leads to life, only a few find it. But this narrowing will not diminish us. If we find the hard road and take it, then blessed are we, and blessed shall be those whose minds we change by our witness. So that's what it occurred to me to say to you. Again, I will put, I see I've got some questions here. Hang on. That's questions that you might want to pick up now if we're going into breakout rooms, but I don't know how people want to proceed. Do you want to, I see there are one or two questions there. Yeah, I agree with both those points. Yes. But what's helpful? How do people want to proceed? Do you want to go into breakout rooms again, or?
Sorry. He asked me to unmute. I don't mind. What do you think, Dan? Dan, can you hear me? What do you think? We ought to go into groups first to give people all a chance to speak. If we had 5 or 6 minutes in a group, and then we asked each group to bring back a question, will we do something like that?
Yeah, okay, that sounds like a plan.
That's good. Yeah.
I'll click some buttons.
Right. Okay.
Beautiful now. Join.
Can think of the poor sod who's basically done however many minutes it takes to I don't know, make a vest, make a t-shirt, and just kind of pause and think of them when I'm buying the thing, you know, humanize what I'm holding in my hand, you know. That's somebody made that, somebody went without for that, you know. I mean, again, some people would say that's ridiculous, so that changes nothing, but it changes me. And then I think to have these conversations, you know, that and to be contacting again. We mentioned the sort of the plastic wrapping of vegetables and so on, that you actually become a bit of a pain in the butt for the supermarket management. You know, I mean, at the very least, it's not recycled plastic bags that go into the recycled plastic bag bin at the supermarket for me. It's all the damn packaging that they gave me last time. I systematically take it back and shove it in. I mean, assuming it's of the right sort of plastic, shove it in that thing, and the polluter pays. You know, they're very minor things, I know, but I think that things which also empower us, which tell us, no, we're not helpless. You know, there are things we can do. Some of which will be, you know, controversial. I mean, it never occurred to me until 3 or 4 years ago that eating meat produces methane in significant global warming quantities, you know. So I might want to make meat more marginal in my diet than it had been. You know, in fact, I don't eat very much meat at all now, really. But that sort of thing, which has to be negotiated if you happen to share a table with somebody. But the negotiating might be the important thing. Be my hunch.
Thank you. Thank you.
Depends what sort of meat as well. It's mainly beef and also dairy products, cattle products. Chicken is all right, and so is fish.
Although with chicken, you then face all the questions about how the chicken is reared as well. So there's no such thing as a free lunch, you know.
I just meant from a methane point of
Yeah.
view.
Oh, was there another question from a group? Any other groups arrive at something? Oh, I've got new messages here. You know.
Well, can I say something from group 2?
Go on.
If people don't, we didn't actually agree on anything, but I think we sort of started to think that the only way this is going to work is a very strong lead from government, because 2 of us could remember the restrictions of the Second World War coming in and being very effective, but they were dictated by the government. But everybody saw the threat and were able largely to comply. And maybe that's what's got to happen here, is that we've got to recognize the threat of climate change before we can actually accept the controls that are going to be necessary to change our lifestyles. I don't know whether anybody else from group 2 wants to add to that.
It's Sylvia. The only thing that still bothers me about it all is because I don't understand. We can do a lot of useful stuff as a nation, but should we not be thinking on a larger scale, like a whole of Europe? Because this is how the planet works. It doesn't just pick on little bits of us. And the catastrophe that might happen if we do nothing will just strike right the way across the continent. It's not just going to be a little effect.
About what people were talking about to happen, sort of bringing laws and being dictatorial and change your lifestyle. Haven't we already had to do that a little bit because of COVID?
Yes.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting what has been accepted in terms of infringement of people's rights. And indeed, if you like, the amount of surveillance that has been imposed in some terms of track and trace and so on. But of course, the mechanisms of surveillance are there. If you've got a credit card, if you've got a Nectar card, if you do online shopping, it's all tracked. You know, might not be by government, but somebody's got that information about you. So we are kind of living in a fool's paradise. We think that we have freedom, you know, even in the Lone Star state, where they probably would talk about that more than most places. It's not freedom. It's commerce having its claws in you. Yeah.
I think your point about how being content is such an important one. It's small scale, but it's something it's a mind-changing one. And if we start doing that, even on a tiny scale, it can influence other people.
I would say, I would add to that and say that one way of looking at it is that society should be more concerned about what it needs rather than what it wants. Consumerism is all about what we want, not necessarily simply what we need.
Yeah, we certainly confuse the two, don't we? But we're encouraged to. That's how consumerism.
Yeah, that's what the companies do. That's what marketing does to us.
I think as well, we are encouraged to, instead of if you have enough money to live in a contented life, we're encouraged to spend any excess to our lives on ourselves and never to share that extra wealth. And that's where our charities come from, is, you know, to spread the wealth to people who have less than us. But we are massively encouraged to, you know, have the nice car, go on holiday, to do all of those things instead of helping our fellow man.
Very good point. That very good point.
I think government will talk about GDP rather than people's well-being. So they'll talk about GDP growth rather than the fact that, you know, millions of children in this country go hungry every week. And that message seems to be working because those governments that talk about that, they get in power. So, you know, there's I suppose a need for sort of a sea change in terms of what people, how they value quality of life for society, really. And we started, didn't we, with the pandemic at the beginning, talking about the NHS and clapping for the NHS. Then as soon as the crisis was over and there was talk about nurses getting a pay rise of 1%, it was like, oh no, we can't afford that. But then, you know, the government make a decision to spend a lot more money on nuclear weapons. So there's a choice that's taken, and they take the choice because people vote them in because of those policies. So I feel a bit pessimistic in a way at the moment, because I think people generally don't necessarily think the way I think. The great general population are thinking in a way that Rob talks about, sort of a consumerist kind of view of the world, really. Hence why I think, you know, we've just cut our overseas aid budget and people haven't sort of been on the street saying how terrible that is. You know, people, maybe not people here tonight, but we'd be saying, yeah, we got to think about people in their own country. They don't see the global implications of that, really. So yeah, it's difficult, isn't it?
Very difficult.
Rob, could I ask you whether you could just give us a word, like, do you feel optimistic, or do you feel more pessimistic about whether the world in the future will be able to reject this, you know, fanatical consumerism and adopt a more equality-based way of living? Or are you optimistic or pessimistic, would you say?
I mean, I suppose the pessimistic side is the fact that the world can live without us, but we can't live without the world. You know, that's the bottom line. The optimistic side is that people are aware of it now. You know, the conversation is being had. I don't think that the Bolsonaros of this world are going to last much longer. And I'd be very surprised if Trump got back in, actually, because I think legal niceties are going to catch up with him before 2024. Even though there's a vast majority of the Republican Party that bought the lie, you know. So I think there are grounds for hope, you know, but it's all is to play for. I think it's a very, very serious situation we're in, and this year people are talking about it as the crucial year. You know, our dear bishops have finally this Sunday. You're going to get. I'm not sure how to use it myself. I'm not sure I'm going to use it in the homily slot myself. But there's a pastoral letter from our bishops. It's okay. I don't think it's as profound as it could be, but at least it's raising the question of the environment in a serious manner, as an essential part of our Catholic faith. Now that's progress, you know, and the fact that Pope Francis is, you know, the secular press talking about him going to COP28, I mean COP26, as somebody with real standing, you know, not as a kind of religious sideshow, but he will be listened to with utmost seriousness, you know, because I think he's provided some of the more, or gathered some of the most creative thinking around. So, you know, if there is hope, I think a large part of it is to be found within our Christian tradition. You know, and I don't say that in a chauvinist way. I just think that that's actually the truth. We've got the building blocks, that I was trying to show, for living in a very different manner, with more solidarity and with more compassion, more understanding of the links, you know.
I wish we could get these messages out more. I mean, Laudato Si is a fantastic piece of work.
Yeah.
It wonderfully brings together economics and religion. And I have passed it to a number of people who don't have faith, they're not involved in the church, but I do get some very good reactions from them. It is incredibly powerful, and I hope that the messages can be pushed out at COP26.
Yeah, and I think that fundamental to our humanity is hope. You know, it's worth remembering that the future of Europe was plotted by people in concentration camps and prisoner of war camps. You know, people who didn't have any realistic ground. Even the birth of Israel, of course, we might regard it as highly problematic in its current state. But the daring to dream is an essential human quality.
We're gonna go.
Yeah.
Low battery.
Julie, you're fading on us.
Fading, yeah. Good. Okay.
Okay.
I don't know where Jill's gone. She was there for a minute.
I think she just plugged herself in or something like that.
Okay. Well, you are actually at your time limit. We are 5 minutes
Yeah.
before the end. Is there anyone else who wants to say something, or can we finish with some sort of prayer? I think this has been a really, really challenging meeting, and a good way of ending our program of looking at Fratelli Tutti. And I will be in touch with all of you who have asked me to send your email, and those of you who haven't asked me, but I still send it to you, whether you like it or not. So,
Yes, please.
And Nora, I sent you a copy of a PDF of my talk, if it's of any
Oh,
interest
right.
to anyone. So
oh, good.
feel free.
This will be recorded,
Yeah.
and, it will be, and I will also send out a note to everyone. So if you were here, it's not really for you to say you missed a brilliant talk. It will be on the website. Make sure you listen to it. And because, and I ought to say that many of our talks have had dozens of people reading it afterwards. We can see how many people have done it. And it seems to be the more controversial the talk, the more numbers, the greater numbers we've had. So I think it's been a really good tool for discussion. And if you're not in Bognor Parish, maybe you can discuss it where you are.
I think it's also useful to think, if people do these things, do they think that it will actually make a difference to the climate change? Because climate change will continue no matter how much we do.
Yeah.
Nora, can I just say really big thank you to you on behalf of everybody, I'm sure. I'm not from Bognor Parish, but I've come to all the Zooms, and I think you've done a fantastic job planning the programme. All the talks, all the speakers have been really thought-provoking, really stimulating and inspirational. So thank you very much to you. I look forward very much again to meeting as a group in the same room, sitting in a circle. But thank you for keeping it all going. Thank you, Nora.
And I ought to say to everyone that Helen is going to be one of our speakers in the autumn on women in the church, which I hope is a nice, or words to that effect.
A bit wider than that. That will be one issue. We will look at women in the church, but we're going to look at the future, church at the crossroads, future.
A big one.
We will, but not on Zoom, please. My laptop's not up to it.
We'll tell Boris, Helen.
Tell Boris, yes. I don't want to fork out for a new laptop because I've got to live simply, put up with this old unreliable one.
We're still on.
Rob, will you end us with is he still there?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Can you bring us together with a prayer? Maybe just, I don't know what, if necessary, just an Our Father.
Well, why don't we pray a prayer for the Holy Spirit? Because I think we need the Spirit to be hovering over the waters of chaos again, and the church needs to be renewed by the Holy Spirit each year, each day, and the Spirit is the one who inspires, who gives hope and inflames hearts and makes us get up and do stuff. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you will renew the face of the earth. Amen.
Amen.
Good note on which to end.
Thank
Been lovely
you.
being with you, everyone.